What's up YouTube, it's your boy JP's on the keys and it's too easy in this video today, and we have more oversimplified because y'all apparently really like when I do these. So American Revolution oversimplified. I literally took a college course on this time period last semester, so let me put my Western college education to the test. Put my westernized education to the test. I'm actually pretty anxious to dive into this because I feel like I definitely add some stuff to this. So let's just go.
Holy smokes. Christopher Columbus, that is no way to address the King and Queen of Spain. What is wrong with you? Okay, so you know how we're looking for a new trade route to India, right? Right. And the earth is round, right? Right. So I'm thinking we can just sail the other way around the planet, right? Yeah. So I set sail, right? And I reach India, right? Right. Wrong. I did not reach India. I did not. All right, get to the point. Did you know there's a whole nother freaking continent out there? Okay, and you think I should care about this? Why? Oh, I'm sorry. Did I forget to mention there's gold everywhere? Gold?
So wait, hold on. Before we get to the thing, so my thing is, first of all, when did the flat Earth theory even come into existence? Because my thing is, how would they have known that it would have been quicker to go around to India? Because if we're looking at a map, so let's say Spain is on the westernmost, in the west, on the westernmost part of Europe. So most likely they were probably going all the way around to Africa. They're around the bottom tip of Africa to Spain. So they must have thought going around, I don't know what the logic was. How would they have known that, hey, let's just go around, let's just go somewhere, maybe there's something to the west? How would they even have known that it was something to the west? How would they even have known to go to the west? Because obviously the map makers only had probably Europe, Asia, parts of Asia, Africa, probably those three. Africa, the western part, the eastern part of the world. That's really all they had. So I don't know how they thought it was going to be something over there. That was my thing.
Columbus landed in Central America in October 1492, and he had the time of his life. And by that I mean he went on a huge theft and murder spree. He stole gold, jewelry, people, and a hammock. And then he returned to show off all of his riches, including a few previously undiscovered items such as tobacco, the pineapple, turkeys, and a hammock. Now,
I know there was a thing called the Columbian Exchange, where it was basically people were brought, slaves were brought, diseases were brought, diseases, people, goods, items, everything was exchanged between Europe and the new Americas. Basically the Columbian Exchange, that's where everything was, shipped due to people coming over and taking from there and bringing back to Europe.
I know what you're thinking, but oversimplified, Columbus didn't discover America, the Vikings did. And you'd be partially right. In the 11th century, Leif Erikson was the first European to land in America. But hey, if you love Vikings so much, then why don't you check out today's sponsor, Vikings War of Clans.
Yo, this man is a beast with the sponsors.
This is a mobile game that was inspired by the famous strategy and RPG games of the 90s like Age of Empires and Civilization. Do you like building cities, collecting resources, training armies, joining a clan and going to war? Then my friends, Vikings War of Clans is for you. And what makes its world so addictive is that more than 20 million online players are constantly changing the way the game evolves by never-ending fighting over resources, forging...
I need to hit up some of these mobile games to get these sponsors, because apparently these mobile games are paying. Because it's either this game, either Raid Shadow Legends. If you watch YouTube enough, you probably seen somebody who has Raid Shadow Legends as a sponsor. I need that. I need that mobile game sponsor bag. Please, I need that.
New alliances and competing in live events. Support my channel by downloading Vikings for free, only from my links in the description box below, and get the special bonus of 200 gold coins and a protective shield. Don't forget to look me up and join my Vikings clan under my nickname, Oversimplified. Now where was I? Oh yeah, Columbus, time of his life, hammock. And suddenly the race was on to explore and conquer the new world. After a couple centuries of warring with the natives and each other, the European powers had claimed quite a lot of land, including this area, which both the English and the
claimed it. was claimed they won. My thing is how would they have? How do you like establish a border though? Like you might claim a certain thing. Like how do you claim? How do you know? Like obviously in this instance, it's because the Appalachian Mountains was right there, and that's obviously a natural barrier. But I'm saying, like, how can you just be like, oh, this is our land, this is our land, this is our land? Like, there was no type of. Of course, you're like, well, somebody's gonna come like, well, obviously they won it by war, but there was no type of treaty, there was no type of contractual agreement. When you do something, you make a. But this is back in the 80s. This is back in the time where that wasn't matter. They just we conquer, just because we conquer it, the conquer. You know what I'm saying? Just the conquering.
French claimed as theirs. One day the French said, I'm going to build some forts along here. And the English were like, could you not? And the French said, sorry, but no, I could not. And they went ahead and built their forts, which pissed off the English. So they sent an up-and-coming British lieutenant colonel by the name of George Washington with a combined force of British troops and Native Americans. After a short battle, the French commander said, all right, we surrender. Okay, boys, pack it up. There's surrender. Oh, sorry, was I not meant to split his head open with a tomahawk? Don't worry. It's not like this will start a 7-year-long major global conflict. And what happened next was a 7-year-long major global conflict, which Great Britain won. At the peace negotiations, Spain gave up Florida, while France gave up all of its territories in North America. But Britain's victory came at a cost, a £60 million cost. They were now broke, in a lot of debt, and had to come up with some way to repay it. So they went to the colonies and said, okay, listen up. So a huge part of the war was spent protecting you from the French, and now we have no money because of it. So... I'm not sure what you're saying here. Okay, so we spent a lot of money protecting you from the French, right? Right. And now we're broke. That certainly is a pickle. Listen to me. We spent all of our money protecting you, and now we need money. Can you please pay us back some money? No. Okay, we're just going to go ahead and tax you. In 1764, Britain introduced the Sugar Act, forcing the colonists to import sugar and molasses exclusively from the British and to pay duties on them. Then a year later, they introduced the extremely controversial Stamp Act, and it worked a little something.
All these, of course, as you know, all these acts were called the Intolerable Acts by the colonists, or the British called them the Concierge Acts. I don't know why they call them that, but there was just a whole bunch of just taxation, like the colonists felt as if they were unfairly taxed. I mean, I would feel kind of oppressed too if somebody is taxing me. Somebody is basically like exporting the sugar, like exporting sugar. Like, oh, you can only get it from me. Like that's blatant exploitation. Stamp Act. Like every document that I send has to have your stamp on it, and you're gonna make me pay for the stamp that I send. It has to be approved by you. It has to have an approved stamp, and I have to pay for said stamp that I have to put on the document. Like that's just gouging. You know what I'm saying? It's gouging.
Like this. Hello, shopkeep. Hello, Mr. Bungleberry. Here's the deed for your new shack. Stamp. That'll be 3 pence, please. Wait, what was that? It's the new tax. I get a stamp on any paper or documentation I make, and you have to pay for it. Would you like to see this pamphlet that explains everything? Yes, please. Okay. Stamp. 2 pence, please. This is awful. You know what? Just give me a deck of cards so I can go gamble my pain away. Okay.
Stamp.
No. Don't do it. Stamp. Obviously, the colonists were like, hey, my dudes, this new tax legislation right here, this is BS. Until now, they had enjoyed relative freedom to rule themselves, and now suddenly Britain was asserting its control. They were especially unhappy because they didn't have any representatives in the parliament that was levying taxes on them. So they protested. Orators gave fiery speeches. British goods were boycotted, and anyone loyal to the British found themselves increasingly harassed. The whole thing actually began to take quite a toll on British business, and after just a couple years, the British were forced to repeal the Stamp Act. But we still desperately need money. What should we do? We could try taxing the colonies. Great idea. Wait, didn't we literally just try that and it failed miserably? Man, look at me. I look fabulous. Have you ever seen such a handsome boy? No siree, Georgie. No way. You're the handsomest, smartest, most popular king that ever lived, and everybody likes you. You're doing such a good job. Your Majesty? Oh, you're still here. Get the hell out. So in 1766, the British made a declaration saying, we can do what we want because we're in charge and you can all go suck it. Then they levied a whole bunch of new taxes on the Americans via import duties. Glass? There's a tax for that. Lead? There's a tax for that. Paper? Tea? Oil? There's a tax for that. And once again, the Americans boycotted British goods, British business felt the pinch, and the British had to back down. All right, this is ridiculous. They're my colonies, and I have to be able to assert my control. Repeal all the new taxes except for the one on tea. Also send 1,000 troops to Boston to take control. Oh, and make the colonists pay for them. And as British troops...
And it wasn't. And then they had something called the Quartering Act. Is now like you were required to house British troops in your homes in times of war, and like there was no type of, oh, I'm going to give you rent because I'm living in your space. Like, no, you have no privacy now. Suppose you and your wife and your kids are at the dinner table, and now all of a sudden here's a redcoat sitting at the table with you, eating up all your hardtack and your molasses. Like, come on now. I don't like that. Like, that's just intrusion right there.
Arrived, the tension in Boston was palpable. You could cut it with a knife, and it was all about to come to a head. On March 5th, a band of local patriots began heckling a British guard at the customs house. More and more Americans joined in the heckling, while more British troops turned up in support of their comrade. Snowballs were thrown at the British. The snowballs turned to rocks, the rocks to oyster shells. The soldiers, outnumbered, panicked. One thing leads to another, and you can see where this is going.
To be honest, what I've read, I feel like it wasn't. The British soldiers did not just fire, like, just willy nilly. It was an altercation. It was an altercation first. Like, obviously throwing rocks is not going to incite somebody to shoot at you. Obviously it would make sense somebody had to rush them. You know what I'm saying? Somebody had to rush at them, like, because the commander of that brigade did not order anybody to fire at all. That's...
If civilians were killed, the Patriot press throughout the colonies declared the Boston Massacre an unwarranted crime committed against the people of Boston by the cruel British, and the anger continued to grow. A British revenue schooner that ran aground in Rhode Island was burned by the locals. When it came to light that the governor of Massachusetts supported the suppression of the colonists, his house was burned by the locals. And next, the colonists would set their sights on the remaining tax on tea. On December 16, 1773, a band of patriots known as the Sons of Liberty disguised themselves as Native Americans, marched down to Boston Harbor, boarded a British merchant ship loaded with tea, and in front of thousands of spectators, threw nearly 10,000 pounds worth of tea overboard. The British were disgusted.
Just the fact, that's crazy how they even needed to disguise as Native Americans. Because why would Native Americans have a problem with British tea? You understand what I'm saying? Like, why would the Native Americans have a problem with tea? The Native Americans weren't drinking tea until it was imported. I mean, the Native Americans weren't drinking tea. Tea was imported into America from Europe. So I don't understand the significance of dressing up as, I guess, to kind of deflect the blame onto the Native Americans. I don't know. But the thing is, Native Americans would have had nothing to do with the situation because they weren't involved, because they were all wiped out by now. Either that, or they were all the way in the western part of the United States that hadn't been discovered yet.
And they punished Massachusetts with a vengeance. They dissolved its General Assembly, revoked their charter, and sent 3,000 more troops to occupy the city, meaning Boston and Massachusetts were now essentially under the direct rule of Great Britain. And oh boy, were the people pissed. The other colonies saw what was happening and worried they might be next. So they called a brain trust to decide what to do. 56 delegates from 12 colonies gathered and met in Philadelphia at the First Continental Congress, and the roll call read like a who's who of America's finest thinkers. I'm talking lawyers extraordinaire Johnny A. and Johnny J., experienced military commander George Washington, businessman and future alcoholic.
So George Washington, he was a British general? Because earlier it said George Washington was a British general, and now he's all of a sudden fighting for the colonies. George Washington.
Samuel Adams, fiery orator, Patty H., guy who married a rich lady, Big J. Dickinson. And while they weren't present at the first Congress, soon names like James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and much later Alexander Hamilton would all serve time in the Continental Congress. The question now, though, was what to do about the British. After much bitter debate and disagreement, they eventually agreed on an amazing solution. They would simply ask the British to stop. Can you stop? No. It didn't work. Okay, then tell the local militias to start arming and be ready at a minute's notice. And across the colonies, these Minutemen stood ready for the beginning of the American Revolution.
And listen, that was the Second Amendment. That was really what the Second Amendment was made for. Because if it was a militia, the Second Amendment is the right to bear arms, or the right to bear arms in a militia, to form a militia against a government. So if your government went crazy, you have the right to form an army against the government. You know what I'm saying? Obviously, weapons, like the ability to own guns, got entrenched into that, but that was not originally the purpose of the Second Amendment. Because like everybody had guns before the Second Amendment anyway. That's the thing. Everybody had guns. You know what I'm saying? Nobody was regulating. Nobody was really regulating that. That was really a purpose of, like, with these colonies, they formed their own militia. They formed their own army against the government. You know what I'm saying? That's why they put in the Constitution, because that's what they had to do. And now they had to, just in case there was something like this would ever happen again.
War. Now, having your colonies in open rebellion is one thing. Once they start arming themselves, that's when it really hits the fan. So British General Thomas Gage ordered 700 troops from Boston out into the rebel-controlled Massachusetts countryside to destroy stores of arms and ammunition held by the rebels in Concord. The British set out in the middle of the night. Patriots, including Pole...
See, you know what I'm saying? They already had armed. They already had, like, barracks with guns in there anyway. So it's not like they were violating constitutional law by having firearms.
Revere rode ahead to warn that the British were coming, giving the rebels time to prepare. Both sides met in Lexington as the sun began to rise. They faced off.
Lexington and Concord was the first war that started the Revolutionary War. Very true. Yes, it was. The first battle of the Revolutionary War was in Lexington and Concord.
Against each other, and in the confusion, somebody shot first. The shot heard around the world marked the beginning of the American War of Independence. The rebels were outnumbered and had to fall back to Concord as the British split up to search for rebel supplies. However, more and more Patriot rebels kept showing up, and this time it was the British who were outnumbered as more fighting kicked off in Concord. The most professional army in the world was forced to flee back to Boston at the hands of local, poorly trained militiamen. And all along the British route back to Boston, Patriot rebels continued to gather and open fire on the retreating British. When the British reached Boston, the rebel militias surrounded them. Boston and the British were now under siege as small land and naval skirmishes continued around the city. And the British would suffer another embarrassing blow, this time in upstate New York. Colonel Benedict Arnold concocted a plan to take the British stronghold Fort Ticonderoga, which held a large amount of guns and ammunition. He set off towards the fort alone, hoping to recruit men along the way, when he came across the Green Mountain Boys, led by Ethan Allen, who, as it turned out, had the exact same plan he did. So they decided to work together. But I'm in charge. No, 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 I'm in charge. This went on for some time, until the Green Mountain Boys threatened to go home, and Arnold had to concede. The group raided the fort at night while the Redcoats were asleep, and they caught them completely by surprise, taking the fort and all of its munitions with almost no resistance. Wow, great job, Ethan. Very impressive. By the way, what happened to that other guy we sent to take the fort? Who? Benedict Arnold. Never heard of him. Ouch. What the fuck? Nobody knew what was going on. The colonies were in open rebellion, and for now, they even seemed to be winning. So King George fired General Gage, replaced him with General William Howe, and ordered the rebellion to be put down immediately. Okay, the British are definitely going to retaliate for all of this, so we should probably put together a proper army. First, we need to pick a commander-in-chief, and I think we can all agree that that job should go to the man, the myth, the legend, George Washington. My friends, I am humbled and honored that you would consider me for such an important role. I did not expect for this. All right, you've been showing up in a military uniform every day for the last 10 months. We all know you wanted this, so cut the crap, George. Dude. Uncool. So Washington began his journey up to Boston to take command of the newly established Continental Army, just as the British made their first major attempt to break the siege. They made plans to take the high ground on Bunker Hill, but spies warned the Continentals of the British plans, so they fortified Bunker Hill and set up defensive positions on nearby Breed's Hill. The day of the battle came, and as the British advanced, a barrage of Continental gunfire was opened up on them. Twice they tried to climb the hill, twice they were pushed back. The battle lasted 3 hours until the Continentals finally ran out of ammunition and had to retreat, allowing the British to take the hill. While technically a British victory, they suffered nearly 1,000 casualties to the Continentals' 400. The colonists showed the British that this wasn't just a rebellion, it was war, and they were ready for it. But one thing they weren't sure about was why they were fighting. While some radicals were starting to throw around the I word, most hoped to eventually repair their relationship with Great Britain. So they sent a letter to King George saying, "Hey man, looks like things aren't going your way. Remove the taxes and let's be friends? I'm gonna kick your ass." Send that to the colonies. Your Majesty, your handwriting is terrible. Are you sure? Just do it. What does it say? He's gonna lick my... Gross. So for the remainder of the year, small engagements continued to occur around the colonies. The British burned down the towns of Falmouth, Massachusetts and Norfolk, Virginia as revenge for earlier anti-British incidents. These actions played right into the hands of patriot propaganda. Overseas, the British were seen as brutes, and the French and Spanish would soon begin sending supplies to the rebel cause. During this time, there was also
See, that was probably the biggest reason. That was one of the biggest reasons why the colonies even won the war, because of supplies sent, because of the alliance with the French. Because you gotta think, you just this is some ragtag army you just formed with 13 very newly formed colonies against the biggest army in the world. If you don't have any type of supplies, you're obviously gonna get crushed.
minor fighting going on between patriot and loyalist militias in the southern colonies. Benedict Arnold was still on a mission to win some personal glory for himself, so he headed up an attempt to invade Canada in a two-pronged attack. The Continentals managed to capture some British forts and the city of Montreal, but a harsh snowstorm with some smallpox on the side saw them defeated and pushed back at Quebec City, and they were forced to retreat all the way to Fort Ticonderoga. Speaking of which, remember all those guns and ammunition? Well, this guy's got a plan for what to do with them. He uses oxen to drag 120,000 pounds of artillery for 2 months through the harsh winter, 300 miles all the way to Washington and his Continental Army surrounding Boston. Boom. Washington's got himself some big guns, which is fortunate because up until now his army had been suffering through the cold winter, not knowing when the siege would end. Now, they could make a move. Washington wanted to launch a full assault on the city, but his junior officers felt the British were too fortified, and to his credit, Washington was great at hearing and taking on board the ideas of others. Instead, the Continentals worked through the night setting the guns up on Dorchester Heights, overlooking the city, and when dawn broke and the British saw the guns, they knew they were toast. Their positions were completely exposed. It was checkmate. They had no choice but to abandon the city. 120 ships carried 9,000 redcoats and 2,000 loyalists away to an unknown fate, and Washington had his first victory of the war. Washington then moved his army to New York, knowing that when the British returned, they would probably land there. In the meantime, a friendly-looking old man by the name of Thomas Paine had written and published a pamphlet called Common Sense, in which he advocated for total independence from Great Britain. It spread across the colonies like wildfire, and to this day remains the best-selling title in America. It was
So this was basically so you can basically kind of compare Thomas Paine's Common Sense to like Uncle Tom's Cabin from like Harriet Beecher Stowe, because like during this time literature was very, very, very important, and it's a common theme. It was a common theme in these two situations where it was one piece of literature that really shaped the public opinion. Like Thomas Paine, he's advocating for independence. This is a foreign idea back then, because people, it was so many like the colonies were, it wasn't mainly loyalists, but that was the accepted attitude. They were all loyal to Britain, and now people are hearing like ideas, or getting riled up about independence. Oh, maybe we can break apart. Maybe we can actually have our own our own free country. And then during the Civil War, that time, Harriet Beecher Stowe writes Uncle Tom's Cabin, and then it's like, wow, like you're bringing up about this foreign idea of abolishing slavery, because slavery was so ingrained in the society back then that was just a commonplace. And you're thinking about abolishing slavery, why? It's making so much money. And somebody comes and writes a book about all the atrocities and all the hard things or the terrible things she's seen in slavery. Now people's opinions are starting to change. Then that structure is starting to break. You know what I mean? Like two very important pieces of literature have broken apart strongholds in our government. That's awesome.
Read aloud in taverns and meeting halls, and brought the idea of independence into the mainstream. Congress began to seriously consider the idea. Thomas Jefferson was selected to write up an official Declaration of Independence, and he went hard, writing that all men are created equal, with certain inalienable rights, including life, liberty.
All men, you mean all white men that own property. I'm going to keep saying this because that's what he meant. Obviously later on, that meaning is a little bit looser now, but back then that meant white men, rich white men who owned property. That's what he was talking about. But again, he did create the foundation for our government.
And the pursuit of happiness. Of course, Jefferson had over 100 slaves, but we don't have to talk about that.
People gloss over that though. People gloss over that. This is the guy who says that all men are created equal, even though he's holding the African slave. But we forgot during this time, the slaves were not considered to be human beings. You know what I'm saying? They weren't considered. They were property. I know you remember Dred Scott. Dude was living in a free state for 7 years. Went to the court, still considered property. You know, like, bro, they were considered property back then. You know, not all men. 3/5 of a man. Remember that. 3/5 of a man.
On the 2nd of July, Congress voted unanimously in favor of independence, and John Adams declared that the 2nd of July would go down as the most remembered day in American history. Then a couple days later, independence actually came into effect. The United States of America was born. There was no turning back now. The Americans tore down a statue of King George in New York and melted him down into 42,000 musket balls. To the British, it was treason, and if the king had his way...
That was very resourceful, though. You know what I'm saying? Use a statue to actually create ammunition. That's very resourceful. I like that.
Washington and all of Congress would be hung. Speaking of the British, guess who's back? The king sent an intimidating force of 130 warships and 25,000 men to New York. Washington knew that taking on the most powerful military in the world wouldn't be easy. The British set up camp on Staten Island as the Americans dug into defensive positions around Brooklyn Heights, waiting for an attack to come. But the British just waited, wearing down their opponent's nerve while building their own strength. At one point, they launched a big scary artillery barrage and then said, you know, if I was you right now, I'd probably sue for peace. But Washington told them to shove it. The Americans kept holding out for what was coming, and when they finally hit, they hit hard. 15,000 British troops approached the American position, and the two sides fired on each other in massive rows. But what the Americans didn't realize was they were only fighting a decoy. The main British force was going around to flank the Americans from behind, and when they arrived, they inflicted heavy casualties. The Americans panicked and retreated back to Brooklyn Heights, where...
I don't know, it's just me. I've never understood strategy where you literally just get in front of your opponent and just shoot. Like, I understand. Like, I'm not a war general. I'm not a military technician. I'm not a tactician. I'm not a military planner. But just thinking about it from this point, you're literally just standing in front of the enemy. Boom! Hey, we fire. Now while we're reloading, you fire. Like, I mean, can somebody? Maybe somebody that's more inept at this side of history can definitely fill me in, because like the way that the war strategy goes, like, that's not very efficient. You know what I mean? Like, you just stand, boom, fire, and then the other side they just keep trading shots back and forth. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, maybe you should. But like I said, I don't know though.
Where they then found themselves trapped between the British army and the river. It looked as though the war was already lost, but luckily, instead of attacking, the British decided to dig in for a siege, and then a thick fog set in, allowing Washington's army to escape across the river unimpeded. The British continued to chase and engage the Americans at Manhattan, and the Americans suffered defeat after defeat after defeat. It was a disaster. Washington's leadership was called into question, as thousands of American POWs were left to rot as traitors. Washington's army fled through New Jersey all the way down to Pennsylvania. Rarely had an army been so badly beaten, yet survived to fight another day. Till the end of the video to learn how you can get 20% off the annual premium subscription. Washington's butt was sufficiently kicked. Winter was here. His troops' morale was low, some just up and left. Washington needed to do something, anything to restore faith in the revolution. The British had spread throughout New Jersey and settled in for a winter of drinking cider and partying hard. Nobody expected an attack in the winter, so Washington started making plans for an attack in the winter. The British had hired a large force of Hessian mercenaries from the German states of Hesse-Kassel and Hesse-Hanau to fight the rebels. It was these mercenaries that were stationed across the Delaware River from Washington and his army. And there were more Hessian reinforcements incoming, but they made an unscheduled stop because their commander got thirsty. No, not that kind of thirsty. That kind of thirsty. It was Christmas Eve with a blizzard outside.
Wait, they had, whoa, I never learned about that part. I never heard about German mercenaries coming into the United States. I've never heard that part. Okay, that's something I've never heard. Okay, I learn something new every day. I've never heard the part about the mercenaries. I never knew they had mercenaries like coming there. I didn't know that.
when Washington heard the Hessian defenses were down and he decided to attack. He made a perilous crossing of the icy Delaware River with 2,400 men and marched 9 miles to Trenton, where he caught the Hessian forces completely off guard. After a short but fierce battle, the Hessians surrendered in droves. It was a much-needed victory that sent a clear message not only to the British, but to Americans across the colonies. The war was far from lost. General Cornwallis led the British forces south to counterattack the Americans, but in a series of battles, Washington's defensive positioning and flanking maneuvers defeated the British 3 times in 10 days, and the British decided to abandon southern New Jersey for the rest of the winter. Washington finally set up a winter camp in Morristown, but for the Americans, there was much less partying than the British. Elsewhere, the British had taken Newport, Rhode Island, because it was a good naval base. In the south, they failed to take Charleston, South Carolina, which left British loyalists unsupported and vulnerable to more harassment and even mass expulsion. Congress sent Benjamin Franklin to France on a mission to convince them to join the war, and while the French generally loved any opportunity to hoodwink the Brits, they didn't want to join unless it was a sure win. So for now, Franklin spent his days chilling out and chasing tail. The British Parliament couldn't believe the war wasn't over yet, and the pressure was on to end it. So the British came up with a plan. General Burgoyne in Montreal and General William Howe in New York would advance through the Hudson Valley and meet in the middle, splitting the colonies in two and thus screwing over the American communication lines. Burgoyne began his movement south, and after taking Fort Ticonderoga quite easily, he then came across heavy American resistance, so he sent Howe a dingle-dongle asking if he'd be showing up anytime soon. Meanwhile, Howe had completely abandoned the plan and gone for all-out personal glory by capturing the American capital, Philadelphia. He defeated Washington and his army at Brandywine Creek by using the old hit him with a decoy and flank him from behind tactic, and Philadelphia was now in British hands, forcing Congress to escape to York. But Burgoyne was left on his own to face the ever-increasing American force in Saratoga. American General Horatio Gates teamed up with our old friend Benedict Arnold to deal one final blow to Burgoyne's army. Arnold wanted to take the fight to the British, but Gates wanted to wait for the British to come to them. After a heated debate, Gates, the senior officer, told Arnold to go to his room, but Arnold defied his orders, and at the Battle of Bemis Heights he charged at the British and obliterated them. Great job, Horatio. By the way, what happened to that other guy who was in Saratoga? Who? Benedict Arnold. Never heard of him.
Oh, wow.
Ouch. Hey, George? Didn't I do a great job? Taking Philadelphia and all? Didn't I? You're fired. Both Burgoyne and Howe returned to Great Britain, leaving British General Henry Clinton to take charge of the war. And the war was about to take a nasty turn, because with the victory at Saratoga, the French were finally ready to join the Americans. All right, Benny, we're in. Hey, isn't this kind of funny? You know, because you're a republic trying to overthrow an absolute monarchy, and I'm an absolute monarchy helping you? Like, could you imagine if your revolution inspired my people to revolt against me, and then they imprisoned me and all my family, and they chopped all of our heads off? Could you imagine?
So, I'm assuming French Revolution is next. Okay, then.
That's called foreshadowing. For now in America, winter was here once again, which meant yet more disease, more starvation, and even a little mutiny. After losing Philadelphia, Washington's job was again on the line, but suddenly, a Prussian guy with a very fancy name, hired by Benjamin Franklin, showed up out of nowhere and said, "Hey, I'm here to give your men a European military training." And train them he did. They learned how to shoot accurately, how to march in formation, where to poop and where not to, and strict punishments were handed out to any who didn't comply. Washington's army came out of the winter in 1778 a new and improved force, ready to take Philadelphia back from the British. In the end, though, they didn't have to. With the French entry into the war, the British ordered General Clinton to evacuate Philadelphia and consolidate all of the British forces in New York. So Washington sent Benedict Arnold to reoccupy and secure the city as he pursued the British through New Jersey on land, eventually finding a good...
But my thing is, my biggest question is, what were the French gaining from helping America win? You know what I'm saying? I mean, obviously, like, maybe a new ally. Maybe they knew that America had the potential to be a big country. But like, my thing is, what were the French gaining? Because it's not like they were splitting any land that was gained. It's not like they were getting any territory. Maybe this is a relationship. Maybe they had some type of beef with Great Britain. Like, I don't understand. Like, what would France gain at all? Like, what were they gaining by helping them at all?
Good opportunity to attack at Monmouth Courthouse. The battle took place on a sweltering hot summer's day, and as many soldiers died from heat stroke as they did from battle. In the end, after some incompetence/borderline treason from Washington's second in command, it was a draw. And in this war, a draw is kind of a victory for the Americans. Next up, let's talk about this guy. This is John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones is handsome, Scottish, and absolutely insane. When the war first broke out, everyone was like, how did the colonies expect to stand up to the might of the British Navy with their meager fleet of converted merchantmen? Yep, try telling that to John Paul Jones. This guy sailed to the British Isles, somehow captured a British ship off the coast of Ireland, and brought it back to France. Then he returned, attacking more ships, raiding towns, and evading capture the entire time. These are basically pirate tactics. But hey, If it works, it works. In one incident, he captured a British ship and returned to a Dutch port without an official ensign because his was lost during the battle. That's a big no-no and can have you arrested as a pirate. The Dutch helped him out by quickly creating a design based on Benjamin Franklin's description of what the American flag should look like, and they entered it into their records as an official US flag. What they came up with looks pretty cool. The whole campaign probably played heavily on British morale and brought into question...
I've never learned about that. I didn't know about this. See, the American education system has failed me once again. Why am I learning more from a YouTube video than from a college course? This is unbelievable. This is unbelievable. Wow, I'm highly disturbed about that. I learned more from a YouTube video than I learned from a college course.
Their ability to win the war. And fun fact, he was so cool that one of the towns he raided in 1778 gave him an official honorary pardon in 1999. Keep ripping in heaven, John Paul Jones. You're an angel now. What the Continental Navy was lacking in resources, though, the French entry into the war made up for. The French began with naval skirmishes in the English Channel, and they sent a large fleet to America, although it sustained a lot of damage in a storm off Rhode Island. The Americans were hoping for a bigger commitment from the French, so John Adams went to France to help Benjamin Franklin continue negotiations. Oh good, you're finally here. Check this out. Hey ladies, I'd like to fly you like a kite, cause you're electrifying. Isn't this great? Is this what you've been doing? Yeah, why? We were sent here on a diplomatic mission to secure military support from France, not to philander with the locals. Wait, no, ladies, come back. Worst wingman ever. But the Americans would get some more help. The Dutch provided aid, although they never formed an official alliance. More significantly, though, the Spanish, who had already been providing aid, officially joined the war in June 1779. They would provide support in the Midwest and the Gulf Coast, campaigns that heavily impacted the Native American tribes in those areas. Both sides actually enlisted the help of Native American tribes throughout the war, sometimes even pitting those tribes against each other. In the summer of
The irony to come over to the land that Native Americans already had, to kill them, to rob them, smallpox in the blankets, treaty after treaty was dishonored, even after they showed you how to cultivate land. Because they showed you, even after they showed you how to grow things, they showed you how to live off the land. Because you came to the Americas with no type of agricultural knowledge, maybe a little bit, but not as much as these people who are already living off the land. And then you completely take advantage of them, and then you use them in the war. And then put them against each other in the war. Just the hypocrisy and the irony is ridiculous.
1779, after a series of raids against the Americans by the Iroquois, Washington...
That's like the Southern people. That's like in the South. The Southern people start using slaves in the war. Well, now you want their help. Now you want the slaves' help after you've been using them for free labor for a bazillion years. Now, here, take a gun, fight with us now. Like, just the hypocrisy is ridiculous.
Washington organized an expedition that burned down more than 40 villages, forcing the tribes to relocate to Canada for British protection. And another group that shouldn't go unmentioned were African Americans, both free and enslaved. They joined both sides of the war, hoping to gain their freedom. But afterwards, many were simply returned to slavery, particularly those who had fought for the Americans. Despite owning slaves himself, Jefferson had written a condemnation of slavery in the Declaration of Independence, but out of fear of offending the southern colonies, this was removed from the final draft. For the same reason, the American Army stopped enlisting African American men in 1775, a policy that Washington, a slave owner himself, supported, but they were forced to reverse the policy after the British promised freedom to any slaves who joined them. In general,
see, they only did that out of spite. This was not out of a desire. You know what I'm saying? This was out of spite. This is, you know what I'm saying? The British, they played on the slavery native. You know what I'm saying? That was a good play by the British to play on the slavery native, to sort of now they had to force their hand. So now it's now we have to do it now. You know what I'm saying? We don't want to, but like, you know what I'm saying? We kind of have to. And it was, but then you think, it was a fear, out of a fear of offending the Southern colonists, they removed that from the Constitution. So obviously, because obviously they already had that was their cash crop anyway. Because slavery, was cotton, tobacco, any type of thing that could be harvested was their cash crop. So I mean, I see where he was coming from with that, but it's like, you people, you know what I'm saying? These people who are credited with creating the country, you know what I'm saying? They still saw people of color as subhumans. That just, I mean, obviously, they might have felt a certain way, but they couldn't do anything because it was going to destroy. It was going to really shake up. They didn't want to rock the boat. You know what I'm saying? I'm sure a lot of people back there, people that owned slaves, they felt some type of way about having somebody like, you know what I'm saying, someone that's just like you, just a little bit darker, doing your, you know what I'm saying? I mean, maybe they didn't care because they were making a whole bunch of money, but again, I just go off on tangents sometimes.
You stood a better chance of gaining freedom if you fought for the British. However, even those that left with the British after the war suffered mistreatment and discrimination in their new lives outside of America. Our good friend Benedict Arnold is now in charge of Philadelphia. Having a good time?
But you got to think of it though. If you're in the 1700s, in this late 1700s, if you're an African American, would you rather have this? Would you rather be mistreated and discriminated, or enslaved? I'm taking mistreatment and discrimination for 100, Alex. Like, I'd rather do that than be enslaved. You know what I'm saying? Because now even people still are mistreated today, so it's really not. I mean, at least nobody in America is in physical chains. You know what I'm saying? Obviously, physical slavery goes on all over the world. But I'm saying at least we're not in physical chains. You know what I'm saying? It's not we don't have somebody whipping us because we're not doing what we're supposed to. You know what I'm saying?
Partying down with and even marrying a member of the Philadelphia elite. The same elite that had partied down with the British when they controlled the city. And suddenly, the people of Philadelphia, including the state governor, started accusing Arnold of having pro-British sentiments. To keep the people happy, Washington wrote a letter rebuking Arnold, calling his conduct imprudent and improper, and that was too many ouchies for Benedict Arnold to handle. He asked Washington to put him in charge of the fort at West Point. Then he contacted the British, offering to hand the plans of the fort over to them and join their side. Our good friend Benedict Arnold is our good friend no more. Luckily, the treasonous plans were discovered on a captured British officer, but Arnold managed to escape before he was arrested. As a British brigadier general, he would go on to lead raids against American cities, most notably his raid of Richmond, Virginia in 1781. His betrayal shook George Washington, who had once again set up camp at Morristown. His leadership somehow held the Continental Army together through the harshest winter of the war. We're entering 1780, and Parliament was hopping mad that the war still wasn't over. The British debt was soaring, and despite taking parts of Massachusetts in late 1779, the North was in a stalemate, so the British decided to make a major shift in strategy to the south, an economically rich area with a higher level of support for the British, or so the British thought. A year earlier, they had captured the underdefended city of Savannah, Georgia easily, and a joint American-French counter-siege failed. Now, they laid siege to Charleston, South Carolina. It fell within months, with thousands of American troops surrendering to the British, a costly defeat. The British quickly moved to take control, and they sent stereotypical Hollywood villain with a British accent Bannister the Butcher Tarleton into the backcountry, where he hunted down rebels and destroyed them with ruthless brutality. The British presence also inspired local loyalist militias in the backcountry to rise up against their persecutors. The British really seemed to be onto something with their new strategy, and the ball was very much in Washington's court. I'm gonna send my most loyal general, Nathaniel Greene, to the south to stop the British. Gonna have to overrule you there, George. We're sending Hero of Saratoga and your biggest rival, Horatio Gates. Watch this, George. I'm gonna save the day again, everybody will love me, and I'm gonna get your job. Here I go. And he got into one battle with Cornwallis, got annihilated, and ran away. Alrighty, let's go with your guy. Nathaniel Greene knew the British outnumbered his own forces and wouldn't be defeated with conventional tactics, so he had to think outside the box. He split his army into two, said, "Hey big boy, look at me," and then they went running in two different directions. Cornwallis sent Tarleton after Morgan, and he caught up with him at Cowpens, where Morgan proceeded to kick Tarleton's butt. Then the two led Cornwallis on a wild chase through North Carolina, his bigger and better equipped army much heavier and slower than Greene's quick and mobile troops. Greene led Cornwallis further and further from his supply line, then crossed the Dan River into Virginia, picked up some reinforcements, and turned back to face the now exhausted British.
Yo, that's strategy. Like, you run back to, like, you basically let them tire themselves out, and then you get reinforcements, then come back. Then Wow, that's tough though. That's gutsy.
At the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, the two sides engaged in vicious close combat. Cornwallis, fearing loss, fired his big guns into the chaotic fighting, cutting down many of his own men. Greene retreated, giving Cornwallis the victory, but Cornwallis lost a quarter of his men in the fighting, so it felt much more like a British defeat. At this point, both sides desperately needed something to happen soon to end the fighting. The British were running out of money, while the Americans were again facing mutinies as the men went without pay or even basic living needs. Fortunately, the French were now showing up in greater numbers and were ready to fight. After his encounter with Greene, Cornwallis decided the only way to win the South was to first prevent the Southern Continental Army from using Virginia as a supply base. So he abandoned the Carolinas, moving to Wilmington and onto Yorktown, a position the British believed would be easy to supply and support. On his march to Yorktown, he raided many farms, stealing horses and supplies from the locals, but also freeing thousands of slaves, many of whom joined him. The French saw Cornwallis's new position as an opportunity to land a decisive blow on the British. Washington wanted to attack Clinton in New York, but the French said it was a really dumb idea. And to be fair, it was. Instead, Washington sent out fake dispatches to make it look like they would attack Clinton, but secretly their combined force marched all the way down to Virginia. A large French fleet under the command of Comte de Grasse arrived and successfully cleared the British Navy out of the Chesapeake Bay. The combined land and naval forces then laid siege to Cornwallis's army in Yorktown. The American and French forces tightened in around the city, raining artillery down on Cornwallis, who desperately appealed to Clinton for aid, but Clinton was unusually chilled out about the whole thing. Cornwallis held out for nearly a month before he had no choice but to surrender. Over 7,000 British troops were captured, a crushing defeat, and with that, Parliament had reached the end of its rope. The war just wasn't worth it, and it needed to end now. The British still held New York, Charleston, and Savannah, but fighting between the two sides mostly ceased as peace negotiations opened up in Paris. The resulting treaty in 1783 saw Great Britain remove its troops from American soil, recognize U.S. independence, and cede territory up to the Mississippi River. In return, the Americans agreed to pay any debt still owed to Britain and gave fair treatment to any colonists who had remained loyal to the crown. The Spanish got Florida, while the French got an economic crisis that led to its own revolution a decade later. Washington retired to his home in Mount Vernon, wishing his men farewell by saying, "I most devoutly wish that your latter days may be as prosperous and happy as your former ones have been glorious and honorable." He hoped to live out the rest of his days in peace, but unfortunately for him, a number of people wanted him to be the first leader of the new country, and by a number of people, I mean literally everyone. The first election campaign in American history was basically a grassroots effort to convince Washington to accept the office. He was sworn in on April 30th, 1789, and he himself established many of the standards and limitations of what the American leader should be. First,
using campaign ads, using campaign funds to pay your mistress hush money. Oh, wow.
First of all, there was debate on what he should be called. Is he a king? Is he our glorious leader? In the end, they went for a word that at the time was pretty modest. President, like the president of your local bowling club or office bake sale committee. He set up a cabinet of expert advisors, knowing that no president could know everything, no matter how much of a stable genius they claimed to be. He proposed major legislation to Congress and gave an annual State of the Union address to keep his own power in check. He stated that the U.S. should remain neutral in foreign conflicts, and in
Yeah, right.
In the end, he voluntarily gave up his power after just 2 terms. He could have made the presidency anything he wanted, but his careful and cautious actions helped set the precedent of an office that is powerful in its limitations, decisive through its diplomacy, and respected in its humility. And so the United States was born, and everything was perfect. It had no problems, not a single one. Certainly nothing that would, cause such an extreme divide that it would lead to a civil war. Anyway, moving on. Quick quiz. Name the most American thing you can think of. Baseball? Bald Eagles? Calling the winner of an America-only sports tournament world champions? Or maybe math and science? Wait, math and science? That's right. If you didn't know, science is as American...
Alright, but anyway, just my only question involving this was like, why did the foreign countries get involved? This obviously had nothing to do with them. Maybe, I just don't, that's the thing I've never understood. Like, why did France get involved? Like, they never went into why France got involved. They just, all of a sudden we randomly got an alliance with France. And then, boom, they helped us win the war. So now, they never said anything. Does the United States owe France now? Or you know what I'm saying? Do they owe France now that they helped them gain their independence? And then I've never learned about the Hessian, what do you call it, the Hessian mercenaries? I've never heard about that. And about John Paul Jones going to, basically being a pirate and just seizing territory in Great Britain. You know what I'm saying? Just seizing territory. I've never heard that. But anyway, Thank you again for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you are new to the channel. Don't forget to share the video wherever you share videos at. Also, don't forget to turn on my post notifications so that you don't miss an upload. But anyway, thanks again. I'm out. Be safe during this quarantine. Have a great day. Stay on the grind. Peace.